Hi and welcome back to part 1 of the Sleep Well, Live Better course. So thank you for joining me, and in this section we're going to get started on what is sleep. So there's tons of information out there about sleep. It's been around forever, so everybody's got an opinion on it. There's lots and lots of research, and actually, although we're always learning about sleep, there's still lots and lots of stuff that people don't know. So what I'm going to focus on in this course is I'm not going to spend lots and lots of time talking about sleep and science and theory behind sleep, because I think that the reason you guys are here and have bought into the course is because actually your sleep is not good enough and you want to improve it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on why it's really important to sleep well, because I think that you're aware of that, which is why you've been motivated to buy into the course. But there is nothing quite like a good night's sleep. So we all know that it's essential for both our physical health and our mental health. If we have a bad night's sleep, really quickly we notice it in terms of we feel irritable, we don't look as good, we might struggle to concentrate as well the next day. So fairly quickly we notice when we've had bad sleep. But longer term, the effects can be that physically we might find that we get poorly more often. We tend to make less healthy lifestyle choices if we are sleep deprived. So we tend to not stick to diets very well. We haven't got as much energy to exercise. And longer term, there are links to obesity, heart disease, and other illnesses. So we know that sleep is really important for our health, but it's also important for our mental health. Studies now show that the two pretty much come hand in hand. So if your insomnia and poor sleep is triggered by anxiety or depression, then the anxiety and depression will often get worse as the sleep gets worse. But it's very chicken and egg, because the other way around, if you are sleeping poorly, it's very difficult not to feel depressed or anxious about it if it goes on for long enough. So the two really come hand in hand. And so it's important for a number of reasons to try and get the good quality sleep that we need. So excuse me looking down at my notes. I am going to refer to them as we go to make sure that I'm covering everything, because what I want to provide you in these sessions is like a one-to-one session. So I want to make sure that I'm giving all the material that I would give in a one-to-one session to you. So periods of lack of sleep and poor sleep are very normal, and we are designed to cope with them. So the odd night, the odd couple of nights of bad sleep, if there's something on your mind, is a very normal pattern of sleep. What isn't normal is when we get to the point where actually it's been going on for weeks or months or years, and we're finding that there's hours and hours spent either worrying about sleep or lying in bed wide awake. The good news is that you're not alone. So 1 in 4 people are struggling with poor sleep, and 1 in 10 have chronic insomnia in the UK at this time. So it's a big problem. You might have been to your GP and they maybe have offered you some sleep hygiene tips. Perhaps they've offered you some medication. And maybe if you're lucky, you've been offered some CBT for insomnia. And CBT for insomnia is the recommended NHS programme of treatment for the disorder, but it's very difficult to access. My background is working in mental health and working with poor sleepers, and what I found was that actually it's a very treatable condition. Lots of people get better very quickly, but unfortunately there's very little access to the knowledge and the skills and the techniques that they need to know. Which is why I founded the Insomnia Clinic, because I wanted to complete my mission, which is to get the UK and one day the rest of the world sleeping better without having to use medication to do that. So what we're going to be looking at is, to start off with, is what is sleep, some sort of basics around sleep, but also what controls it and what causes the insomnia. So the structure of sleep, what we know about sleep is that it's roughly in 4 stages. So when you first go to sleep, that's that very light sleep. So that kind of, this is where you get that odd sensation that perhaps you've fallen off something, and that's called a hypnic jerk. And that is when your heart rate's starting to lower. In order to fall asleep, our heart rate lowers, our blood pressure, everything starts to slow down. And often, if you're sleep deprived, which most people with insomnia are, if you're sleep deprived, what you'll find is that it drops too quickly, and your body reacts to that drop by sending this shot of adrenaline, which makes you jerk and you jump up and you feel like you've fallen off something. So it's not dangerous. It's annoying because normally your heart's racing by then and you can't get back to sleep again. So for insomniacs, it can be a real problem. But that's usually in the first stage of sleep. Stage 2, still light sleep, very easy to be woken up. You probably don't know if you've been asleep or not if you're woken up in that time. And then we drop into stage 3 and 4. And this is deep quality sleep. This is the good quality sleep that we need. It's characterized by being harder to wake, your heart rate's dropped, your blood pressure's dropped, your temperature has dropped, and you're usually breathing very deeply. In this time, this is where the quality sleep is happening. This is where your body is being repaired, where your tissues are being regenerated, where memory consolidation is happening. So it's really important that we get that deep quality of sleep rather than just the early stages of sleep. And then the final stage of sleep is around REM sleep, so rapid eye movement, and this is where your dreaming takes place. What's very normal through the night is to wake up. So if you asked a good sleeper whether they wake up or not, they would probably be aware that they do wake up a few times per night. And actually it's very normal. The problem is that when you're a poor sleeper, we tend to think that we shouldn't wake up at all. But actually, when we go into light sleeps, it's completely normal to wake up, roll over, maybe have a sip of water, go to the toilet, go straight back to sleep. So I guess a sort of normalised sleep, waking up after each of these sleep cycles is very common, and it's not a problem. So I want to sort of do some education as we go, I guess, around what is normal sleep, because if you've been sleeping badly for a long time, you may have forgotten what normal sleep is, or you may never have really known and you're just looking at other people and thinking that they sleep deeply for 8 hours every night. So it's probably not the case. And I like to think of the stages of sleep like a pyramid, that if you think that in this pyramid at the top, if we're getting all of those stages of sleep, all that deep quality sleep that we need, your body has time to do all of the jobs in this pyramid. So at the top would be the most important jobs. So looking after your brain and your organs and memory consolidation. As we get down, the sort of less important things, and finally at the bottom would be, looking, your eyes looking nice and bright and white and your skin looking good and feeling really refreshed and, jumping up in the morning and feeling great. And I think if we think of that quality sleep, that if we don't get enough, your body has to let some things go. So you will survive on little sleep. Your body will cope, and it will certainly take the sleep that it needs to look after your main organs and do the big jobs. But it's those little things that usually we see suffering straight off, which is kind of mood and how we look and our energy levels, those kind of things. They're the bits that we don't get if we don't get that quality of sleep. So moving on to what actually controls how we sleep. So we know a little bit about what sleep looks like. We actually don't need to know more than that. We don't need to dwell too much on micromanaging all the different stages of sleep. But what we do need to understand is what actually controls how well we sleep. So there's 4 things that control it. The first thing is our sleep drive. So if you imagine an elastic band, when you wake up in the morning, this elastic band starts stretching. So it gets tighter and tighter and tighter as the day goes on. By the end of the day, by the time you get into bed, the ideal scenario would be that the band was as tight as it could possibly be, ready to snap, and then you would fall asleep, you would take back all of that sleep debt, and you would wake up when you'd had enough. So that's how it should work ideally. We build up this drive during the day, and then we take it all back overnight. And we know that the sleep drive is really important because if, for example, you were to have a nap in the evening before you go to bed, what you would find is that your sleep drive wouldn't be high enough, and you'd either struggle to fall asleep or you'd find that your sleep was very weak and fractured, because it's a bit like an appetite, that actually if you have a nap, it's a bit like having a snack. You've taken the edge off your appetite and suddenly you can't really eat as much. So the sleep drive is important. It has to be really high. But we know the sleep drive is not the only thing that controls how well we sleep. We also need our body clock to be to understand what it is you're wanting your body to do and when you want it to sleep. So our body clock, most people have heard of, is our circadian rhythm, so a 24-hour internal clock. And within that clock, it's not just looking after sleep and wake time, but it's also controlling when we get hungry, when we get thirsty, when we use the toilet, our temperature. And so things tend to fall into routine within that 24 hours. So when we're sleeping well, we have trained our body to know when to fall asleep and when to wake up. So we are born with the ability to know how to sleep. Babies know how to sleep, but they don't know when and they don't know for how long. And we have to train them how to do that. So it's important with our body clock that once we start sleeping, let's say we get into a habit where we wake up at 2 o'clock every morning, very quickly, if we kept repeating that pattern, our body clock would just take that on as a new routine, and it would expect that we want to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe if you get into the habit of having a 2-hour nap every afternoon, again, your body clock would just start to get tired in preparation for that nap, and it would take it on. So although that's not what you want, your body clock will take on the behaviours that you give it and the patterns that you give it. So we know that your body clock and your sleep drive have to work together in order to sleep well, because, for example, if I missed an entire night's sleep, so let's say I was working all night, or I just can't sleep and I missed the whole night's sleep, but I get back into bed at 8 o'clock in the morning, I would probably only sleep for 2 hours, maybe 3 hours if I was lucky. I'd feel really groggy, I wouldn't feel refreshed from it at all. And that's because actually my body clock doesn't have any relationship with being asleep at 8 o'clock in the morning. So what I'm trying to do is put something new in my body clock. And what my body clock would do is say, okay, we'll have a couple of hours because that's enough to get me through the day. But I certainly wouldn't get back 6-7 hours of sleep like I would get at night time. And that's because my body clock has no relationship with sleeping at that time, and my drive is not high at the same time. So the two have to work in sync in order for us to sleep well. The third thing that we need to have in order to sleep well is a connection with our bed, which is actually about sleeping. So it sounds obvious, but actually if you're spending lots and lots of time in your bed, in your bedroom, frustrated, wound up, staring at the ceiling, or listening to things, or looking at things on your phone, working, then actually the relationship with your bed becomes about things that are wakeful activities, not sleeping. So even if you just lie in bed resting, but you are awake and you are thinking, this is a wakeful activity. And bedtime is for sleeping. So that connection with our bed needs to be about sleep, and the associations that we make with our bed and bedtime are really important, and we cover that as we go about how do we strengthen those. So our drive has to be really high at the same time as our body clock would actually expect to be able to go to sleep, and our connection with our bed needs to be strong. And if those three things are in place, then those are the things that we need to manage in order to control our sleep. And when our sleep is not working, it's because these three things aren't in place. So something has gone wrong and they're starting to spiral and they're no longer working together. Okay, and then the fourth thing that we need to know about falling asleep is that falling asleep is an automatic process. And as I say, we are born with the ability to do this, and we don't need to try. We don't need to interfere too much in this. So it's important to remember that as we go, that often the more we're trying to sleep, the less likely it is to happen. So we can sleep. Our bodies do know how to do it. We just have to train them by looking at that sleep drive, our body clock, and that connection with our bed. So what actually is insomnia? Who are we talking about when we talk about insomnia? Because it's a word that gets bandied around a lot, and I think people usually think of insomniacs as somebody who can't get any sleep at all and they're awake for weeks on end and never sleep. But actually insomnia is classed as anybody who has trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, waking not feeling refreshed. And if that's been going on for more than 3 nights per week and longer than 3 months, that would be classed as insomnia. So if your problem is just that you're struggling to fall asleep, it is classed as insomnia, and the good news is that it is therefore treatable with this program of treatment. So why do we develop it? How come some people get insomnia and some people don't? If we're all born with this internal ability to sleep, why can some people do it and some people can't? So the model which describes insomnia is called the 3 Ps model. So some people are slightly predisposed to having insomnia. So if you are somebody who is very, very anxious by nature, tends to ruminate and overthink things, then you are more vulnerable to developing insomnia, because obviously in a dark room at night is a great place to sort of start worrying. So you're slightly more vulnerable to develop it. If you grew up in a household with a parent who was a terrible sleeper, who always took sleeping medication and talked a lot about poor sleep, then again, you become slightly more vulnerable to developing insomnia yourself. The second P is a precipitating factor. So something happens which triggers a bout of poor sleep. So this can be something really, really big and really obvious, like a bereavement or a divorce or exams, something really obviously stressful that would mean that you can't sleep. Or it can be something very minor, like a cough and cold for a couple of nights where you just couldn't sleep soundly, or perhaps your neighbours started making a noise or a dog barked and woke you up and you couldn't get back to sleep. So it can be something very minor. Or you may not know the trigger. It may just be that you can't really remember, but you just started sleeping badly. So something happens and it triggers some poor sleep. Now, if we sleep poorly, the first thing that we do is try to get back the hours that we lost. So as humans, we are pretty intolerant to poor sleep. So if I slept badly for 2 or 3 nights, certainly by the third night, I would be aware that I'd slept badly. We don't take it in our stride very well if we're not sleeping well. So the first thing that I would do is go to bed earlier, because my priority would be, how can I get back the sleep that I've actually lost? So I would go to bed earlier. And although initially that would feel like the right thing to do, if we go back to the things that control our sleep, you can see that already just by going to bed earlier than I normally would, I'm interfering now in my sleep drive. Like, is my appetite as high as it should be if I've gone to bed earlier? If I'm suddenly going to bed at 9 rather than 11, does my body clock understand why? Does it have any relationship with falling asleep at that time? So I go to bed earlier. If that doesn't help and I'm still sleep deprived a week later and I'm still sleeping poorly, what I would then start to do is try other things. So I'd probably Google it. I'd maybe either drink more caffeine or give up caffeine. I would perhaps get some mindfulness, try doing some yoga for sleep. I would perhaps look at buying something herbal from the doctor, from the pharmacy, like a little potion of some sort to kind of see if I could calm down and relax before bed. And then as time goes on and I'm still not sleeping, the main thing that's happening is I'm becoming very hypervigilant about sleep. So I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm Googling it, I'm talking to other people, and I'm starting to worry a lot about the fact that I can't seem to fix it. And then as time goes on and we're months and months down the line, people are making more drastic changes. Maybe I've cleared everything out of my bedroom. Maybe I've got blackout blinds fitted. I've got a new mattress. My husband or partner is now in another room. I'm terrified of the kids waking me up, so I'm wearing earplugs and eye masks. And maybe I'm trying all these different things to sleep well. And so the final part of the 3Ps model is what perpetuates the problem. So what keeps the insomnia going is not the thing that triggered it in the first place. It's the things that I'm doing to try and fix it. So the more stuff that I do to try and fix my poor sleep, the more vigilant I'm becoming about sleep, the harder I'm trying to do it, the weaker my connection's becoming with bed, because suddenly I'm there for hours and hours wide awake, or I'm doing things in bed that I didn't used to do. My body clock is very out of sync because suddenly I've got these huge periods of time awake and then I'm tired in the day, but I'm wide awake at night. And my sleep drive is no longer working consistently because I'm falling asleep at different times and I'm not building up this drive consistently. So in the end, the reason why we develop insomnia doesn't matter. What matters is the habits and the behaviours that we've taken on, which we have now connected and associated to our bed and our bedroom and sleeping. And it's those associations and those frustrations which are causing the problem. So we end up with something which is called conditioned insomnia, which is where our bed is actually becoming a cue for wakefulness. So a good example of this is you're on the sofa watching TV, you're fully relaxed and you're about to nod off. So you think, that's it, I'm sleepy, I'm in my sleep window, and you rush upstairs to bed, you get into bed and suddenly, ping, you're wide awake, your mind's racing and you can't sleep. And that's because your bed has actually become a cue for being awake and being vigilant and feeling anxious. So your bed is now triggering that response because you've spent so much time in bed feeling that way. So hopefully what you're starting to see is how some of the things that you've done to try and make it better, which is fine, it's what we all do, but actually some of those things really aren't the best thing that we could be doing to make it better, because we are weakening this connection that we have with our bed. So bed plus wakeful activities equals conditioned insomnia. So when we think about this vicious cycle of insomnia from a CBT model perspective, we get into bed and very quickly, if we've had poor sleep for a while, we're thinking about it. So we get into bed and we're thinking, what if I don't sleep tonight? How am I going to feel tomorrow? What if I can't drive? What if I perform badly at work? That creates a physical response within our bodies, which makes us tense, which makes us less likely to sleep, which creates this connection with our bed. So in the booklet, which is attached to, in booklet number 1, which is attached to this video, you will find a worksheet which outlines that vicious cycle of insomnia. And what I want you to do is have a think about what things have you done because you were trying to fix your poor sleep, which you can now see are probably causing some of the problem. What habits have you taken on? What have you given up? You know, we see lots of people who sleep poorly who actually don't do anything sociable anymore. They never go out in the evenings. They can barely even watch TV because they're so worried about the screens and the light and that it might work them up. So their evenings are spent with these long, wind-down, boring routines that result in poor sleep. So think about your routine. What have you changed? What have you given up? What have you taken on, which actually now you can see might be part of this problem? So the first piece of homework is to go away and fill in that worksheet. And the second piece of homework so you're going to watch this session today, and then I want you to go away for a week before you watch the next session. And in that week, the homework that I'd like you to do is complete a sleep diary. The sleep diary is in the booklet below. And to properly introduce the sleep diary, it is an approximate measure of how you're sleeping. So it doesn't need to be an exact measurement. It's just to give us an idea so that you can use that data when you start the program to make the changes. So the sleep diary is something that you would fill in the morning when you wake up. And it's just what time are you going to bed, about how long do you think it's taking you to fall asleep, and about how long in the night do you think you're awake. And as I say, it's just an approximate, about 20 minutes, about an hour. It doesn't need to be exact. So I want you to fill in your sleep diary every morning for the next week. And actually, often that can be interesting to see because you will notice your own patterns. You may notice the nights you sleep worse, and you may start to understand why yourself. You can see some of the behavioural changes that you've made, and you can see how they're impacting on certain nights. So fill in the sleep diary for the next 7 days. And then I just wanted to make a note about sleep tracking, because at this point people often think, well, I don't need to fill in the sleep diary because I've got an Apple Watch or a watch of some sort which records my sleep, or I've got my phone under my pillow and that's recording how well I sleep. The way that I feel about sleep tracking is I think that generally a lot of them can be quite unreliable in terms of how well they're measuring sleep. What we know is that in order to really accurately measure sleep, we need to be in hospital, hooked up, and have a proper sleep study, which is monitoring everything. And actually most of the things that you can buy and have on your phone or in a watch, most of those sleep trackers are actually using movement. And the problem with that is if you're someone who fidgets all night, it will look like you've slept really badly. If you lay still, but actually you're wide awake, it may look like you've slept well. So they're fairly inaccurate. But more for me, the issue is that you know that you sleep badly because you wouldn't be here if you didn't. So actually tracking it is part of that problem. It maintains it. We obsessively look at our tracker when we wake up. We decide how we feel based on those results. So if your tracker tells you that you only got less than 1 hour of deep sleep, and then somebody asks you if you want to go and do a presentation at work, you're going to say no, based on this app. So for me, there is no point in tracking. They're pretty inaccurate, and they're telling you something that you already knew, but they're also not helping you to sleep any better. So get rid of the trackers throughout this program. I just want you to focus on the sleep diary and looking at the habits and understanding that rationale behind why you've developed poor sleep. And in the next session, I'm going to talk a little bit about sleep hygiene. I've kind of covered today that sleep hygiene is not going to fix your insomnia. Many of you will have already tried it, but I do want to go over just a few things in good sleep habits before we kind of get stuck in. And then we'll be moving on to use that sleep diary to work out what changes you need to make to put into place a new schedule, which is going to help you to sleep better. Any problems, don't forget the Facebook group is there for you if you need to ask any questions. I can't answer any questions via email from anybody who's on the course, but you can ask in the Facebook group, and I go on there regularly and answer them that way, and also other users can also give their feedback too.